Evening creatives, this is attorney Angela Green with PFM TV, that's Position for Millions Television. We're here to provide entertainment business consulting services for independent artists and other creatives. And so I'm coming in tonight to kind of follow up on a video that I posted last week. I talked about 3 things that you should think about before you start negotiating your contracts. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about leverage. One of the things that I mentioned was that you need to know that whoever wants or needs the deal the most usually has the least leverage. And so I mentioned that in the other video. And so I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit more about leverage, which is essentially your negotiating power. That's what leverage is. And the interesting thing about leverage is that negotiating power actually comes and goes. Just because you may be have the least leverage in one situation, that may totally change the situation moving forward. There are a lot of things that play into what your leverage is going to be. Circumstances, situations, individuals, life, perceptions, all of these different things kind of play into and helps to create or diminish your leverage. And so I came across a story that I thought was very interesting, and I thought that it clearly illustrates how leverage comes and goes back and forth between 2 people or 2 organizations that are trying to negotiate their business dealings. So I know everyone is familiar with Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars is probably one of the most successful film franchises in the United States, possibly the world. And they have one of the most successful toy lines to go with it. And so there's a television show on Netflix called The Toys Who Made Us, or That Made Us. And that just kind of gives you an idea of the type of stuff that I like to watch. But it's a documentary type series. And they actually had an episode on Star Wars and how that first deal with Kenner was negotiated. Kenner was initially the toy manufacturer for Star Wars. And so going back to early 1970s, back then, the toy industry was pretty much driven by television and television shows, commercials and television shows. And the thought was on a weekly basis, you have commercials, you have television shows, and so you create your toys around that. And so you're constantly putting it on the mind of the children, and therefore the children are putting it on the mind of their parents to buy the toys. So that was the engine of the toy industry, television. Films was not in that space at all. Okay, so now you come along, George Lucas. He has a script for Star Wars. He has recently reached a deal with 20th Century Fox to produce this film, and he has concept art for toys. And he believes that these toys will do well. And so he wants to negotiate with a toy company to produce these toys. But keep this in mind. When you are negotiating a deal for the manufacturing of toys, industry standard is to start 2 years before those toys are supposed to hit the shelves. 2 years. George Lucas did not want his concept art floating around the toy industry 2 years prior to his film actually hitting the theaters. And so he sat on his toy concept art, and he did not start his negotiations, or he did not start shopping that concept art to those toy manufacturers until 6 months before his film was supposed to be delivered, okay? So 6 months out, he's looking for a toy manufacturer. So with that, he's turned down by every major toy company. That's Mattel, that's Hasbro, that's Parker Brothers. So the major toy companies all passed on the concept art because you have to remember it's mid 70s. The toy industry is driven by television. No precedent for a film to have a serious impact on toy sales. So, and on top of that, he's coming to them 6 months out before it's ready, before he would need the concept art to be ready to go to the children. So I guess, it made sense. Why would we pick up this deal? I mean, it seems like, if the toy companies are thinking, why would I put myself under this stress for something that very well may not be lucrative in the end of the day? And so they all passed. So the last sold toy company that they sent this film script to was Kenner. And Kenner was the small company on the block. So they were not one of the majors. And so they received the script, and one of the executives there at Kenner had been following George Lucas and was familiar with his career. And once he read the script, he was the proponent that says, yes, we need to do this. Okay. So once has a toy company that wants to do it. And if you think about it, he brought the deal to the toy company. He has the film that's coming out in 6 months. He wants those toys to be available or to be on the way. So obviously, Lucas is the one who wanted and needed the deal the most. Okay, so interesting as the story goes along, they actually start manufacturing and doing the work to get ready to have these toys, at least to start marketing these toys when the film comes out, prior to even negotiating the main deal points. Okay, so they just was both, he was happy he had a manufacturer who wanted to do it, they were happy to do it, and so they just started working. It wasn't until a month before the film was to come out that they actually came up with the major deal points. Now, we all know that the toy industry, Star Wars, that is a multi-billion-dollar industry. We know that today. They didn't know that when they were negotiating those toy rights at that time. They were going out on a limb. And so the deal points on that initial contract to manufacture toys was that George Lucas and Century 20 Fox would split 5 cents on every dollar made. Almost sounds unreasonable. 5 cents on every dollar made. Kenner was to get the exclusive manufacturing rights on the Star Wars franchise in perpetuity, which that means forever. And all they had to do was to pay George Lucas and Century 20 Fox a minimum of $10,000 a year. Okay? When you think about where they are right now, that doesn't even make sense. I mean, we would know we're gonna keep that deal. I mean, and really, they did not realize that deal was so bad. Kenner didn't know that they had it so good, and George Lucas did not know he had it so bad until that film hit the theaters and the Star Wars mania exploded. And they could not get those toys on the shelves fast enough. And actually, and people were buying anything that had Star Wars on it. They were buying it. And that went on for all 3 of the first Star Wars films to come out over that time period, the 70s and the 80s, when those 3 films hit the theaters. Kenner had the exclusive rights to manufacture those toys, and they made a mint. And they said that industry made about $14 billion. Okay. Now, I'm going to stop right there because it really illustrates where the leverage was in that deal. When you look at the the situation, the history of the toy industry, what was going on in the markets. Movies driving toy sales was not the norm. That was not what was normally happening. And so therefore, the other toy companies, they were willing and happy to pass on that deal. Lucas waited. He waited until 6 months before he really needed those toys, and he basically put himself under the gun. He wanted those toys. And so at the end of the day, he did not have a breaking point. He didn't have a walk away threshold. He had to have those toys associated with his film project. It mattered more to him to prove that concept, that this film could drive toy sales, than it was for him to make the most money that he could make off of those toy sales. And so they were willing to go ahead and accept that deal, which was grossly in the favor of in their disfavor and in the favor of Kenner. And so you see how those circumstances, those mindsets, really played into establishing the leverage in that negotiating situation. Okay. Now, after those films were released, George Lucas decided that he was not going to produce the next 3 films. He decided, his words were, I'm going to let the brand rest for a while. So through the 80s, I guess early 90s, you did not hear about Star Wars, and the toy sales started to decline. So you didn't have as much going on. In the interim, Kenner ran into some hard times, and they were acquired by Hasbro. So Hasbro basically bought them out, and they attained the rights to the Star Wars manufacturing toy franchise. And it's something, when you have those types of rights, when you're transferring that ownership over, you see, you have to be clear on exactly what you have and what are the stipulations for maintaining. Because if you remember, it's a sweet deal. I mean, Kenner had the worldwide rights, exclusive rights to manufacture the toys of the Star Wars franchise in perpetuity. All they had to do was to produce enough sales to pay a minimum of $10,000 to George Lucas and their film company. And after that, they will give them 5 cents on every dollar made. So that's all they had to do. But when Hasbro purchased Kenner, they did not study that deal. The sales were going down. They assumed that the rights were no longer valuable. And so what they did was they missed the payment. They didn't send the check for $10,000. And as soon as they missed that payment, George Lucas recaptured his toy distribution rights, manufacturing rights. He recaptured it. And then after he did recapture those rights, a short time later, he announced the prequels. Okay. So he's about to start doing it all over again. But this time, he has set a precedent. Everybody knows it's basic, it's common knowledge. Films such as Star Wars can push toy sales and push them to the stratosphere. And so it's industry standard now. He basically set that stage. So you're at a different time. So when he announced the prequels were coming out and that now he was in the market for a toy manufacturer, this time there was a bidding war. Because now everybody wanted to have those manufacturing rights. And so therefore, the leverage, the negotiating power has now shifted. and it is now in the favor of George Lucas. And the situation and the proof of concept has basically given him that leverage. And so Kenner Hasbro, in desperation, because out of everybody, they remember the glory days of those first 3 Star Wars films and the billions of dollars that they made. And so they were desperate. And they said, we have to get those rights back, no matter what. So at this point now, Kenner Hasbro are the ones who want and need the deal the most. And out of that desperation, they pretty much gave the whole kit and caboodle. So whereas the first deal, they only had to pay them 5 cents for every dollar. On the second deal, they had to give them 18% of all of their gross sales on the toys. And why they agreed to that 18%, I really don't know, especially since they felt that they would not even be able to make any money at 18%. But just like Lucas the first time, Kenner Hasbro this time, out of desperation, did not have a break even. They did not have a point in which they would walk away. And so they took the deal. And the rest is history. And so I just wanted to share that story with you because it gives you a lot of good information on negotiating and how different situations and time and circumstances, how all of that plays into leverage, whether you have the higher negotiating leverage power or whether you have the least negotiating leverage or power. And that will help you as you are starting to negotiate your different contracts. And you are starting to recognize where you fit in the situation. Because once you do that, that places you in a better negotiating position just in knowing I am the one who needs and wants this deal the most. But the other person doesn't need to know that. But you definitely need to know that. Because at that point, you can basically set your break even so that you don't put yourself in a situation that is detrimental and not beneficial. Because sometimes a deal is just not worth it. Anyway, this is attorney Angela Green with Position for Millions. I hope this information was helpful to you. If it was, I just ask that you just click the button, click the like button, share the video, just let people know what we're doing at PFM TV. If you need a music industry consultant, please join us or reach out to me through our website, which is www.positionmenow.com. And until next time, please always stay positioned.